Et c'est le moment inspiration avec Lionel Fogarty, le guerrier défenseur de la poésie aborigène, avec Ali Cobby Eckermann, qui est devant vous. Je lui laisse la parole.
Hello? Oh, yeah. I was invited to think about a hero, and I've chosen Aboriginal poet Lionel Fogarty. He lives in Queensland, so it's a semi-tropical country. He's a Mulunjali man. He's a grandfather. He has 7 children. I don't know, 40 grandchildren. And he has been at the start of Aboriginal poetry for most of his life. I think his first book was published when he was 22. I'd chosen him, like when I was thinking about a hero, I was thinking, is it the character that makes a hero, or is it the deed? And I think with Lionel, those two things can't be separated. He's dedicated his life to going beyond the discussion of colonisation and capitalism. What he was doing in the 80s, he was writing stories, sharing stories from like his kitchen table, from his community, giving real life examples of the suffering of Aboriginal people, and being quite articulate in the why and the how. And I don't believe a voice had been as successful to challenge the readership of Australia in this way before. His story is different than mine. His family were herded into a sort of rounding up that was almost like a concentration camp, what was happening then. So you were just rounded off your traditional country, and the government told you had to live there. And you had to live with people that traditionally you mightn't have got along with. There was all these different language groups. Everything was just shaken up and people were put in there. There was, from what I've learnt from Lionel, the management of these places was very brutal. I remember one time he shared this story. It's always stayed with me. There's lots of politics and things we could talk about, but sometimes it's just an example that gets the point across. So him and his cousin, they had to ask, the tropics is hot and there's a river, and they had to ask to get permission to swim in the river. And maybe they're 8 years old, and the mission manager looked at them and said, "You can swim and you can't because you've got the wrong shorts on." And they were both wearing the same sort of shorts. And it just stuck with me about, where does the heroism of activism come from? It comes from those moments where someone has to stop you from going for a swim on a hot day when you could see the river, and why should you even have to bloody ask anyway? I actually want to read one of his poems, because part of what he's always educating is that if you always look at the world with money being at the top of the ladder, there's always a problem for someone else. There's always going to be someone else that's suffering. So he's got this poem called Bungle Bungle, which means money, money. I will masquerade as a poetic, deep and abiding in black oppression. You will rip my justice apart. Con your promises, bring us nothing. We are forced into slums when monies are nations. Nations are turned to face money. But our struggle will bring life. I just want more to give more. Will you give some paper money to help a poor father with 7 children at home, writing about you and his people? He's a very cheeky man, Lionel. He's quite brave in his... when he was younger, I think he was definitely in the face of Australia with his truth. I think to be at the forefront of with the activism that was in those times, so the 70s and the 80s, Australia called for an embassy, and I know there's an embassy here, Australian embassy. Aboriginal people wanted an Aboriginal embassy. The first embassy was an umbrella. And now, 40, 50 years later, it's a shipping container. Australia refuses us to have an embassy on our own country. There was great protest then. I was still at high school. I didn't know who I was. I wasn't involved. This is part of my learning of Aboriginal history. But there's footage, and I've sat down with the brave people who were there. It was as important to meet with elders as to meet with the activists. They were the ones that got, you know, the smashed in the face with the butts of the police guns, who put their lives on the line to call for justice. And Lionel, out of that, Lionel's poetry became stronger. It was a grassroots movement. It didn't come from the university. The community would have dances and cabarets and raise money. That's how they got to publish his books. So I don't think mainstream publishers would have touched the contents of his book at that time. It was too confrontational. They like to, you know, the mainstream media and people with voice like to label things like radical and, you know, terrorist and whatever when people are standing up for their rights. And I remember Lionel saying that, you know, he was very aware that the Australian Federal Police used to follow the activists around and kept files on them that you weren't allowed to access for 30 years. He's also my hero because he went to school till he was 14, and yet he's crafted a strong voice for Aboriginal people in Australia and from around the world. And no one else in the world can copy him. No one can copy his style. No one can copy his manner. And I think that takes a heroic intelligence to be that person. Bungle, bungle, he's always giving money away. He's so loved, I've watched him, he's so loved by poor people, by the homeless people, because he will pull up and he will read them a poem. He's quite a funny character. He can be a funny character. And he will stay there and he'll read the activism poems and make them feel embedded in the process of activism and bring them joy. He's always giving money away. That was another thing in, it's very an old Aboriginal trait, that you were rich in your giving, not rich in what you hold on to. And to see that all the time with Lionel, he's always giving and giving and giving. Australia, I think, has been a bit nervous around his truth-telling. He never really won any awards until quite recently. And, you know, he's entered older life now. He's not that young, active fighter that he was. He's a grandfather. He's taken up painting now. He does poetry paintings. He hasn't wavered from his purpose. I had the privilege of seeing the education that his children hold and his grandchildren. They all know their song and dance. And really, for Aboriginal people, I think that's the core purpose in life, is to find your song and your dance and be strong in it. And if you have that, perhaps not much else matters. He's also a complicated man. He's had his share of trauma, but that hasn't deterred him from his path of truth-telling. I share this with respect. It's a common, most people in Australia would know that his younger brother was murdered by the police. And there's been no justice, I think maybe 25 years ago. His crime was having a drink of alcohol on the street. And so Lionel dedicated his life then to tell the deaths in custody story, to lead the protests. No policeman has ever been charged with the death of an Aboriginal person in Australia. And similar to the Bringing Them Home report, they had a deaths in custody royal commission. And again, there's maybe 150 recommendations about how you can stop this from happening, how Aboriginal people can stop mysteriously dying while in custody. And I think the Australian Police Force, again, maybe adopted 7 or 9. So it continues and continues, and now every Aboriginal person, related or otherwise, when there's a death in custody, it affects us all. In the Northern Territory, it's quite shameful to see that a new Conservative government was recently re-elected, maybe 4 weeks ago, and the first thing that they did, they undid quite a lot of work by Aboriginal people and good people, and they've dropped the age to 10 years of age. So if you're a 10-year-old kid mucking around on the street, you're going to jail. We've seen the footage from previous of the adult wardens just smashing into these kids. It takes a certain courage to keep constantly, year after year, to keep standing up and keep issues like this as loud as you can. And Lionel has always been one of those people driven by the impact on his own family. He's a black man, so he's also a bit of a sweetheart. This poem is called Love. Love, walk with me. Love, waken with me. Love is a black newborn. Camp fringe dwellers are my love. Love is not seen in cities. Love is my father. Love is my mother. Love's mine. Love is alive and received. Love is a kangaroo. Love is an emu. Love is the earth. Love is the love of voice. Love is my friend. Give us love. Give us love. Our dream time is love. Catch my love over a fire, fire of love. Culture is our love. Culture is ourself in love. The school doesn't give love, so we black power give you love. Proud and simply, love is love to our lands, love. Love, walk with me. Love, waken with me. Now give us the true love. Lionel and I had the privilege to travel around the world, or to several countries around the world, and especially in like Southeast Asia and countries over there, you often hear that the storyteller had a very high place in society, almost at a government level, in the past, and poets were the voice of consciousness, always questioning, seeking justice. And Lionel is that poem, is that person. As I said, he's never wavered from that purpose. There are people who don't like loud people who are confident and won't waver. And so there's been people who have shunned him in the present. But I know that they'll be lauding his poetry when he passes. It's a funny thing when people do that. I think when you sit with someone like Lionel and his intelligence, and you look at Australia, the world, I can only comment on Australia. You know, often the military and the police, they're easily given the name of being heroes or heroic. But often you see those people with the power as somewhat frightened people. And then when they're confronted, it's very interesting to watch their behaviour, because then you see their fear arrive very quickly and they reveal themselves through their mistakes. And I think that is typical of the Australian government over the 230 years since the invasion. They haven't learnt to sit and talk and listen. And so if we get too loud, or our truth is too big, often there's a reaction, I think, comes from that fearful place, and mistakes are made. As I mentioned before about they invest in the wrong things. They can't hand over the power of decisions for the benefit of families, communities, environment. I'm not sure if there's much more I can say about the man, because it's his story to tell, and there's lots of his story that I won't tell because it's not my place. But I could finish with another poem. Capitalism, the murderer in disguise. Like, this was published in the 80s. This is just such brave stuff. You know, I'd like to tell you a story, but I'm afraid I won't use names. I thought, now, what if I get out of this chair and walk to the cupboard, get the gun, load it up, and shoot any white person that walks past this chair, and any black that cries for them. I thought, when they're shot, I get out my best knife, cut the heart out, and stuff it in their mouth until it went down to the gut. A silence came, but my pain was still the same. My legs shook out of my reality. A pig killed my arms. He laughed and said, "You black bastard, what did he do to you?" I said, "You make my fathers afraid, then give them a carved body, ready to shatter a mind, held in drunkenness, fooled and worn out. You make my mothers afraid, so when she sleeps, an axe appears, covered in blood." This might be really harsh literature for people to hear, but for people without voice, they had something to read. It's like I was saying earlier, that I write for the teenage girl and they can find themselves in the literature. This played an important part for young men in Australia to be able to read themselves in literature, so that they don't have to burn down the buildings, and they don't have to riot on the streets, and they don't have to be killed. Literature plays many, many important roles, and in a roundabout way, this literature has gone around the world and helped many a person in its brutality of truth. I remember rocking up at a university in India and thinking, gee, there's a lot of people out the front, and getting pushed out of the way so that they could welcome Lionel. They had been reading his poetry for over a decade. They had a red carpet for the man. And if those of us who have been to India know that the people there suffer great poverty, and the Adivasi people will always be fighting for their land. Their story is very complicated as well. So not only is he a big influence on me, a poetry hero in his bravery, his voice and the respect of him, and the such honest literature that he has written is also respected around the world.
Des applaudissements s'il vous plaît pour Ali. Est-ce qu'il y a des gens de l'Assemblée désireux de rajouter quelque chose ou de poser des questions ?
lecture before, I wanted to ask you a question about the fire on Australia. Can it be a feedback, karmic effect from the Aboriginal people because of all the bad things that had been done in the past? Non, je veux dire plus...
I guess that's one way of looking at it. What it revealed was that we know our country, and if we had had more opportunity and invitation to look after our country, we believe that wouldn't have happened. And now, after the huge bushfires, instantly there was a need to invite us to that place. Aboriginal people do like cool burning, and so you burn the grass, not in the summer, at different times during the year and at different stages of the grass, so it doesn't become this flammable material that created the big bushfires. And that, as horrific as the fires were, there's been a huge practice now of Aboriginal people being involved in fire control.
Est-ce qu'il y a une autre intervention? Ah.
Yorana, un des préceptes d'un premier roi tétounin, ici en Tahiti, avait comme loi, c'est la loi qui caractérise le peuple tahitien, c'est le peuple de l'accueil, sur l'accueil. Haeremai, haeremai, haeremai tama. Venez, venez, venez manger. C'est ce qui caractérise le peuple tahitien sur cette loi-là. Je sais qu'en Australie, un Australien, un aborigène, qui disait « Nulle culture ne peut prévaloir sur une autre que par sa loi ». Je disais tout à l'heure, la loi de Tétounin, c'est sur l'accueil. Haremai, haremai. Est-ce qu'il y a une loi qui pourrait caractériser le peuple aborigène de ce jour? Merci.
It's so lovely, even at the airport, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you have a band playing. There's some sort of welcome. Everywhere there is welcome. There was another band playing at breakfast today. All the friends that I've met, it's very moving that you're all here today. I think everyone that I've spoken to in the time that I've been in Tahiti who have been to Australia hasn't been able to find an Aboriginal person. We're quite hidden in the population now. So I think we risk being known through a commercial lens. They paint Aboriginal tourism as this happy, we're all included and whatever. It's not mostly the story. It's a very good question to consider. The other thing that I envy, and I've seen it in in New Zealand and other places, that you all know your cultural songs. And so you can get together and you can make a choir anywhere and sing. That does really wonderful things for the heart and for national pride. We haven't found a way through, because there was like the map of Australia looks like Europe. There's so many different language groups. We haven't found a way to have a national song. And so that national pride doesn't really, I think, live within us at the moment. But our protest rallies used to be the place where you put that pride, where 3,000-4,000 people would meet and rally with our flags and yell for our purpose, and the police would have to block off the streets and let us have these meetings. In the last 12 months, the Australian government has snuck the legislation in to make those illegal, and if you're caught protesting and they want to charge you, now they have the right, I think, to charge every person $5,000, something like that. So that they know, I mean, if you watch politics through a particular lens, you know that shit's coming because they've legislated to stop those voices on the street for awareness. But I would say, in one way to character Aboriginal people is love. We think back to our grandparents and we think back to the way that we treat each other and how we understand each other's trauma, and to our best capacity we try to be loving and kind to each other. Even if we don't want to access the government service because it's a white model of anything, you can go down the park and there'll be people there who will look after you, who, like Lionel, who will give you a story, will give you a smile, will include you in a drinking circle, would always try to make you feel like you belong. Our love and our sense of belonging to that beautiful sacred land will never change.
Et c'est sur ces mots que nous allons remercier encore une fois Ali Cobby Eckermann. Donc applaudissements encore une fois et merci pour cette découverte de Lionel Fogarty, le guerrier défenseur de la poésie aborigène. Donc